Do you know that Gandalf and the Witch-king never actually fought? Think about that for a second. Every movie adaptation makes us expect a clash. Fire, swords, spells flying. But in The Return of the King, Book 5, Chapter 4, Tolkien writes plainly, no blow is struck. So why? Why would Tolkien, a master of epic battles and dramatic confrontations, deny us this one? After staying with this for years, I finally realized that this scene's not about fight, but about purpose, duty. It all boils down to what the Witch-king truly is and what Gandalf's mission truly demands. So if you've ever wondered about why the books sometimes feel so different from the movies, this moment is the perfect example of Tolkien's subtle genius. Let's explore it together. We all remember this scene in the movie. The Witch-king rides through the shattered gates while Gandalf sits there waiting on Shadowfax. Right there, everyone expected some confrontation. We even expected a clash of powers, but in The Return of the King, Book 5, Chapter 4, The Siege of Gondor, Tolkien writes that no blow is struck. That means that unlike what we see in the movie, in the book, all that happens is that the horns of Rohan sound in a distance, and the Witch-king turns and rides away. There is no duel, no broken staff. All we have is a moment suspended in time. However, if there was ever a moment for the epic battle between good and evil, should this not be it? So then, why does Tolkien refuse to give us that fight? To understand his departure, we need to go back to his creation. The truth is, the Witch-king was never born as a wraith. He was once a man. In the books, he's portrayed as one of the 9 kings who accepted Sauron's gift, the 9 rings of power. The Silmarillion of the Rings of Power and the Third Age tells us plainly, those who used the 9 rings became mighty in their day. Kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. They obtained glory and great wealth, yet it turned to their undoing. However, what really strikes me in this passage is what the passage does not say. These men never gained power. They traded their will for the appearance of it. The rings that they submitted under did a perfect job at hollowing them out until nothing remained, and they became vessels for Sauron's voice. This is the part that most people did not really get. The existence of the Witch-king was a possibility only because Sauron was sustaining him, and that could explain why he was a slave to Sauron. This means that his authority was borrowed and his strength was conditional. This narrative creates a huge problem for how Nazgul operate, because they do not win through combat. Rather, they win by breaking wills before the battle even begins. Their power is in psychological warfare and not physical combat. Let us start from the Weathertop, where the hobbits feel despair creeping in before the wraiths even draw their weapons. Also, at the Pelennor Fields, seasoned warriors fled in terror just from their presence. This is the power the Witch-king yields, the ability to instill fear in people. Now, watch how Tolkien stages the gate scene in The Return of the King, Book 5, Chapter 4. He writes, "In rode in the Lord of the Nazgul, a great black shape against the fires beyond. He loomed up, grown to a vast menace of despair." Now, this is another part that always gets me. The Witch-king did not ride with an army, or an orc pour through behind him. He rode alone. All he had was his massive figure and the flames that were flickering. It was clear that all he wanted was for the defenders to witness their greatest fortress falling and to feel that crushing inevitability. Then attacking Gandalf would ruin everything, because he would have turned that moment into a fight, and that means something he could win or lose. Moreover, that is so unlike the Witch-king, because his power exists in making resistance feel futile. The second he draws his blade, he admits that resistance matters. And then there's Gandalf's response. Tolkien writes in The Return of the King, Book 5, Chapter 4, The Siege of Gondor, sat Gandalf upon Shadowfax. Now, we know that Shadowfax is the only horse in Middle-earth who can stand in the Nazgul's presence without terror. Gandalf speaks, and these are his words. "You cannot enter here. Go back to the abyss prepared for you. Go back. Fall into the nothingness that awaits you and your master. Go." However, this is not a threat between warriors. Tolkien describes it perfectly in The Return of the King, Book 5, Chapter 4, The Siege of Gondor, and as if in answer, there came from far away another note: horns, horns. After this confrontation, the Witch-king turns away, but not because Gandalf defeated him, but because hope had entered the equation. This is why Tolkien interrupted the confrontation. It was never about who would win a fight, it was about whether hope could survive long enough for help to arrive. Moreover, that was the moment that shifted everything, because the Witch-king's role had always been psychological, and it was never to dominate Gandalf, but rather to enforce fear fire across the walls of Minas Tirith. However, why did Gandalf show restraint as well? He could have easily chased after him, so why did he not? To understand that, we must first understand who Gandalf was. The truth is that Gandalf is not a man who just happened to learn magic. He is a Maya, a primordial spirit who existed before the world was shaped. The Silmarillion, Valaquenta, tells us the Maya were spirits whose being also began before the world. This means that Gandalf himself existed on the same ontological level as Sauron himself, as well as the Balrogs. However, still, he walks Middle-earth as an older man who is deliberately weakened and constrained. However, this restriction is not a weakness, but a purpose, because Tolkien writes in the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, Letter 156, that the Istari was sent to advise and persuade men and elves to good. So the role that Gandalf had was to guide and not dominate. He was not to meet evil with an overwhelming force unless no mortal hand could intervene. This explains why he was able to destroy the Balrog but not to obliterate orc armies. His mission in Middle-earth was to preserve free will and not to replace it. In The Return of the King, Book 5, Chapter 4, The Siege of Gondor, Tolkien writes, "There waiting, silent and still in the space before the gate, sat Gandalf upon Shadowfax. He did not charge forward, nor did he try to raise his staff in threat. All he did was position himself in the Witch-king's path and speak words of command. You cannot enter here. Go back to the abyss prepared for you." Gandalf was asserting his authority here. He did not ask the Witch-king if he was strong enough to pass. He was declaring that he had no right to. That confrontation was a test of legitimacy and not strength. Tolkien gives us his words in The Return of the King, Book 5, Chapter 4, The Siege of Gondor. "Old fool, this is my hour. Do you not know death when you see it?" He raises his sword, and flames run down the blade. However, here is what always strikes me. Tolkien stops the scene before contact. Yes, the Witch-king threatens, he postures, and even tries to proclaim dominance, but he does not strike. This mirrors other moments in Tolkien's work, where evil overreaches verbally before it acts, attempting to reassert control through fear. Tolkien writes in The Return of the King, Book 5, Chapter 4, The Siege of Gondor, "And as if in answer, there came from far away another note, horns, 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 in dark Mindolin sides that dimly echoed. The Rohirrim have arrived. The strategic reality of the battle has fundamentally changed. With the arrival of the Rohirrim, the Witch-king's role is no longer terror within the city, but rather it is command on the field. Gandalf is no longer his priority, but the kings and armies are. That is why the confrontation ends without any form of resolution. In truth, it was never about who would win, but it was about whether authority could hold long enough for hope to arrive, and it did. However, what really strikes me here is the restraint seen on both sides. Gandalf on his own does not pursue the Witch-king, and this is not weakness. At that exact moment, Pippin arrives, and he comes with devastating news. Denethor has collapsed into madness and is preparing to burn himself, and Faramir alive. Tolkien writes in Book 5, Chapter 7, "So, as the Witch-king goes after the kings and the armies, Gandalf is faced with two choices, to either pursue the Witch-king or to save Faramir from his own father, and in the book, he chooses the living. The Witch-king, on the other hand, chooses to prioritize the war effort over a dangerous fight with a Maya. This is one of the reasons why Tolkien interrupts the scene deliberately. Throughout Tolkien's work, we've seen how often he denies us climactic confrontations. Instead, he allows history, timing, and choice to resolve tension instead of using force. But just like Tolkien always gives a satisfying ending to his readers, because in the books, the Witch-king's fate is not denied, it's merely delayed, because later, on the Pelennor fields, he falls into Éowyn and Merry, thereby fulfilling the prophecy through the courage of those he underestimated. One thing that is very clear here is that Tolkien truly understood that if divine beings resolved every crisis, then the choices of men would become meaningless. After sitting with this for years, the logic has finally become clear to me. The Witch-king does not attack Gandalf because his power is derived, not absolute. Gandalf does not fight because his role, as Tolkien writes in the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, Letter 156, forbids domination of free peoples. A son about to be murdered by his own father. This understanding made me realize that the non-fight is not a flaw in the narrative, it's a point. Tolkien is showing us that victory does not always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like standing firm until help arrives. sometimes it looks like choosing to save one life over pursuing vengeance. This is why Tolkien's world feels so real to many, because, in his world, power is not the ultimate answer. After holding the gate and defending it, Gandalf moves on to where he's needed most. That quiet. That is what heroism looks like in Middle-earth. So, what do you think? Was Tolkien right to deny us that duel, showing that victory can sometimes look like restraint? Moreover, if the Witch King had attacked Gandalf, would the outcome of Minas Tirith have been different? Or would it just have been another empty confrontation? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop your answers in the comments, and if this exploration of Middle-earth made you see the books in a new way, hit subscribe. There's so much more hidden in Tolkien's pages waiting for us to unpack it.